All right, good afternoon. It's Pop again, Dennis Murray, and today is Popcast 83, Nature's Wisdom, Part 33. Okay, so a very unusual and strange day for me, one in which I have been antsy all day over this Popcast, and it's mid-afternoon and I'm finally recording. I just have been uncomfortable with the material. Hate is scary, and talking about it isn't very easy. And this book that I been reading a lot in recent days is all the more scary, basically. Um, his description and detail and explanation of how, oh, here, let me take these things off, of how hate forms and, um, uh, the psychiatric explanation for it and et cetera, is interesting and useful. Um, while again, I rarely agree with everything I read in a book, there's good points here that are worth talking about. But his general conclusion, in my opinion, is just completely wrong. His conclusion is that we have to confront hate when we see it. And he points out that we failed to do so with the Nazis. We allowed them to become increasingly embroiled in the hate that their malevolent leaders were pushing on them. And we stood aside and let them increase their power over the years. And so we shouldn't do that again, is his wisdom. Now, we're at the moment not, we're dealing with two different situations here in our lives today in the United States. There's an external group of haters, Al Qaeda and ISIS and the like, and they've wreaked havoc on us, and we are confronting them, and it you know that's one thing, but not something that I want to talk about because the other thing is much larger and more important. It's the hate we are visiting on each other across the great cultural divide, which has now grown to resemble the situation that existed a lot of times in the Middle Ages, where people just had generation after generation of hate for each other, and um, the disaster that was wreaked on the people by their hate was immense. Um, and it seems to me that our situation here is worth talking about, and confrontation isn't helpful. Um, we're all involved in it, and we're all part of it. I mean, there's hardly a soul, over teenage years who isn't on one side or the other of the Great Divide. And so that's where I'm focusing my energies. But what I find is that things he says about communities of haters have become true in the United States, and that it, as I mentioned yesterday, when I was in a somewhat more hopeful mood because I hadn't read all of this book, which is really scaring the bejesus out of me, in all honesty, and kind of knocked me off my feet all day long. Uh, to the point where I was sort of putting off dealing with this. And I mean, I get a great pleasure from organizing my thoughts and presenting them in this way that seems like I'm, I'm putting my many years of privileged freedom to read and think back to the service of the community, as I realistically expect myself to do. There has to be some community benefit from the years you spend in your life, and so this is kind of like an important part of the job. Thank goodness I lived long enough and went through enough of a intellectual and emotional process to be able to do this. And then some clever, hundreds of people invented all of the things that make this possible. Who would have thought, you know, in even in 2000 that any such thing as this would have happened. And for free, you can make a recording on an inexpensive computer, and for free, you can make it available to the general public, whoever might be interested, and somebody for free preserves it for a long time. Wow. So I was sort of in a conflict all day long, because I really view this as a duty, a work, a payback for a lot of years of time that I could spend reading and thinking instead of going to a regular job. And, it's like going to get a doctoral degree. At the end, you got to give a dissertation, and it better be a damn good one, or you're not going to get your degree. So, but I tell you, this stuff scares me. It's dangerous. It's frightening. Okay, so here's what I want to put in today. There are some things he says that we can take away and look at and talk about, and we'll do so today and tomorrow at least. He says that hatred is designed to convert humiliation into pride, and that so the source of hatred is an awful lot of anger and desperation and things not being the way you think they should be in the world. And then you find an enemy to blame it on. And he said an individual hatred requires you to be a psychopath, psychotic. I'm sorry, I take that psychopath back. A psychotic. That you have to have a reality break, and that somehow you see all your troubles as the fault of some, powerful enemy. And you're, as an individual hater, he's not really concerned about you, other than as a psychiatrist if you come into his care. But as a community object, you're to be pitied because you have a terrible disease that we don't have any help for in a lot of cases. But you're not who he was writing this book about. He was writing that about large communities of haters. And he explains that typically a group of haters is formed around their hatred, and they have a common cause and a common enemy. He says having an enemy is important to hate. That part of the way hate brings some kind of psychic value to you is that there's somebody you transfer all your troubles, you blame them on, and so you need an enemy, and so a common enemy and a common cause of let's get that guy. And so now you'll have a typical community of haters. But he said, this is also, even though it can be dangerous to the community, to the larger community, of course, it's quite harmful to the individuals in it. They do much greater harm to themselves than to other people. Because they're making their own psychological condition worse by not seeing, what's really going on in themselves. But he said they don't really have a lot of opportunity to recruit a large population. So, for example, there may have been small groups of people who were filled with hate about some cause or other, and they generally stay pretty small. But he said there's a couple of conditions that, if they occur together, can lead to a very large, powerful group of people being in a community of haters. And there's, he says on page 224, where there's a natural constituency of people joined by history, culture, and authentic beliefs, such as religion, there is the ability to create hatred by converting normal populations of individuals into crusaders for a cause. Now, he was discussing Al Qaeda, ISIS, and the like. And in that chapter, but he says that religion has historically provided a fertile field for the definition of enemies and the creation of hatred. It's a traditional venue for the sponsorship of hatred. And then he goes on to describe the things that religion has that make it so powerful. And there was 5 of them, I think. One of them is that religion says, we interpret the word of God to you and you listen. We're closer to God. We've spent more time working on God's word and the great sacred literature of our religion. Take it from us. And so if they decide to pick the hateful texts and to push hate, they're doing so with the benefit that they're presenting it as the word of God, and people tend to pay attention, to things that the religions say. And another is their power to educate. They often control a lot of schools, and they're presenting their material to adults in various ways. And so they very much are influencing by education the young people and what becomes accepted in the community as the understanding in more detail than what gets covered in the Sunday sermon. And a couple of other benefits: their prestige, their power, and their wealth. So that they've got a lot of advantages. And he's using this in speaking of Al Qaeda. But it made me think about some of these medieval battles where people went back and forth for centuries and centuries over a mixture of politics and religion, because as he points out, that's what's going on in the Islamic world. It's the mix of politics and religion that makes this the threat that Al Qaeda and ISIS represent as a very dangerous threat that operates on a worldwide scale. And he also explains that there's various causes for hatred, and one of them is envy. This is an ideological hatred, but it's fueled as well by envy. The thing, he says, that the people Al Qaeda is worried about and are attempting to represent is that the children are seeing on the internet and on television and on their cell phones the relatively different lifestyle that Western countries, particularly the United States, has. The clothes, the food, the freedom, the cars, the personal lifestyle opportunities. And they want them for themselves, these children do, to some degree, and it scares the heck out of the older folks who are strongly opposed to that way of living. So that part of what's motivating this is envy, and part is an ideology based on religion, and so the combination is pretty powerful. Um, and he goes back and talks about the Crusades and how um, the first pope who asked for a crusade to be made uh, finished his powerful appeal in a big public address with the words uh, uh, Deus or Deo Volt, which means in Latin, as it was used then, God wills it. And it was, I remember in high school class in history, Father Hugh was a pretty darn good teacher, became a personal friend and a confidant. When Gail and I decided to get married, that's who we went to see to ask for advice about whether what we were doing made sense in the circumstances. And so I really liked this man. I really loved this man. He was a good man. And I remember him saying this very powerful last part of the speech of the Pope in like 1050 or 1080, causing the first crusade. And this cry of God wills it was taken up by the crowd and became, you know, a huge thing, a powerful mix of politics and religion. And so it felt to me like, you know, what Dr. Gaylin in this book, Hatred, is talking about, um, you know, was a mix of politics and religion. And that made me think, well, you know, I'm not so worried about Al Qaeda. Uh, I'm worried about the Democrats and the Republicans, because the members of both parties have gotten to the point where they just as soon see the other party fall into a giant a crack in the earth caused by a major earthquake and be consumed, and we could be rid of them. And I think that both parties would kind of like to see the other party, you know, get run over by a steamroller or caught in a tidal wave or something, struck by lightning. You know, it could work. And that's more or less where we are. And as he's talking about it and reminding me to go back and look at, you know, the Middle Ages, there was for like 3 or 4 centuries in Italy, two different groups, um, and a mix of religion and politics, uh, and they have a weird name. I don't know why it's stuck in my mind, but again, from Father Hugh's course in history in high school, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. Now, I'm going to spell them. You know, it's, pardon me, but it's kind of, you know, Guelfs, and Ghibellines is, you know, Ghibillennes, I think. I just went to Wikipedia to be reminded of what the story is about those things. And all you had to do was put in Guelf, and Wiki set you up with a big long article. And I followed a lot of the links to other articles, and I spent a pleasant hour, you know, remembering all this stuff from high school and Father Hugh. Um, and it was unfortunately a day when I was allowed to have uh, FaceTime with Gail, and Gail was just a little too far sleepy and too far not there today. So it was kind of, you know, it kind of got me. And they very kindly called back later in the day to see if it might be a better time. And she was a little bit, you know, better. And we did a few pictures and some songs, but you know, it hurts. It hurts to see she's leaving us, and at a certain pace. And you know, so Father Hugh reminded me of, you know, because he and Gail and I, you know, had that important conversation at the beginning of our lives together. Uh, so I got to balance some of this stuff with a little bit of a more cheerful point of view. Remember yesterday I read The Prodigal. The question yesterday was, and it's still the question for coming days, so how do we react to people whose arrogance, whose intellect has grown to arrogance, or whose fears have grown to hate? And I read The Prodigal, which says, you know, be very open to the possibility that you might you might be able to find a way to recreate the middle with somebody where at the moment it seems pretty unlikely to happen. And if it does happen, accept it, be open to it, be on the lookout for it, and rejoice in it. I have to tell you, I'm not going to go into this much because I'd cry like a baby. But the theme at The Prodigal of he was lost and he's found, of course, that's in Amazing Grace. And it's a beautiful song. My mother's name was Grace. I always loved the song. She loved it, of course. And I very much remember the version that, gosh, I can't remember her name. A very gifted, famous singer sang Amazing Grace back in the 60s and the 70s. So when I started to seriously look into what was going on inside me that needed change in January of 79, and I took 4 months off and focused, on figuring out what I needed to do. And when I came to some beginning appreciation of things, I started, in addition to writing a journal, I often wrote poetic, short pieces. And one of them was a short poem about that ended with was lost and now am found, was blind and now can see, and it was very personal to me, and I really find it quite difficult to talk about it. And yesterday, when I was reading that at the end of The Prodigal Story, it was deeply moving. So I had intended yesterday to put in another quote, and it's a lot more cheerful than Dr. Gaylin's book. So let me just put it on there because I can't leave with all this misery and grimness here. Facebook had a piece from the Contemplative Monk on July 15th this year, and it's a quote from Rumi. Now, Rumi was a poet in the late Middle Ages in the Arabic world. Am I right? Honestly, I can't remember it, and I should remember because I just read it a couple of weeks ago. I went to Wiki and looked it up. Anyway, whoever Rumi was, here's what he had to say. He said, "Come again, please. Come again, whoever you are, religious, infidel, heretic, or pagan. Even if you promised 100 times and 100 times you broke your promise. This door, is not the door of hopelessness and frustration. This door is open for everybody. Come as you are." Okay, it's a little over the top for me, a little too generous. I'm not sure I want the whole world coming to my door and asking for a handout or for a couple of beers. That might be a little bit much. And, I don't think I want any, Vikings, coming and wanting to talk about Valhalla. But In general, the spirit of this Rumi is be open. It's a comparable point of view to the prodigal son. You know, it's a way to respond to people who've given themselves over to hate or intellectual arrogance, and who have decided to come and seek your company. Stay open. And so, more tomorrow. I've got more quotes from this book and more talk about the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. And unfortunately, there was a really ugly, ugly kind of similar religious political event in the southwest of France in the about 1100, something like that. I have to look it up again. Um, and I'll talk more about that tomorrow. The mix of religion and politics is pretty deadly, but I think that's where we are in the United States. So we're going to have to figure out, I hope we don't need to form a third party, but I don't know how we're going to get anybody to trust the other party at this stage. And history tells us that a third party normally goes nowhere. So I was kind of hoping we could have some kind of a civic movement towards, backing away from hate and being more open to each other uh, without getting into politics, leaving it that both parties are suffering from hate, and uh, and both parties are part of the Great Divide, and so I still very much hope that that kind of a thing, could actually happen and might have a good result. Um, but I mean, the more I read Dr. Gaylin, the more I think this might require a third party because there might not be enough trust for any movement to take hold. Um, we shall see. Okay, so find cheer, find cheer. We 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 have our family, we have our friends, we have whatever energy we manage to find, and that's going to have to do it for today. See you tomorrow. Take care. Bye bye.